In this era of modern industrialization and building up of huge corporate cultures, many people, many investors, many CEOs, many financial wizards, they think that there is no role for intellectuals in these organizations. And they think people who can contribute surplus money, they are only the people required. In my experience also, I too heard several people saying who are the top brass drawing high salaries that the organization does not require any intellectuals. What they require is people who can do things, people who can bring money to the organization. With my little reading and experience, I totally differ with that comment or with that concept, and I would like to present in my own way, with my experience as the foundation, what is the requirement of an intellectual to an organization, how they can mold the organization, then they can think of, then the remaining top brass can think of profits and other things. But if they essentially forget that there is about the necessity of critical thinking, I'm sure that organization cannot expand. Even if it expands and making money, it will not be done on a proper foundation and the long-term strategy and the long-term functioning. Those organizations will suffer a lot. Now I would like to present my talk on this subject. We will see the intellectual's role or importance in an organization does not draw its strength from the field in which he or she works or in the manner in which he or she presents his or her suggestions to the field to which he or she is oriented. It rather seems from his or her strong and unbreakable belief in the importance of any work that can be considered and added value to the organization. Whether in its reforms category, which requires the targeting of gaps that, if neglected, widen to become major gulfs. This is the real role of an intellectual, where with his critical thinking and analysis, he can bridge gap between that neglected widen to become major gulfs. If the organization allows several areas of or in the several branches of its administration, the major gulfs, a stage will come that it will become beyond the capacity of the organization to bridge that. Hence, the role of intellectuals is very primary, and every organization shall have a category of intellectuals as a batch or as a group or as an advisor group. Whatever it the coinage they frame, they require some intellectuals, irrespective of the age, education, and other things. The only measurement, the only indicator for them is their ability to express and their ability for critical thinking about the organizational processes and systems. Now we will discuss what is the role of an intellectual, the definition of intellectual, and other things. There is absolute necessity of continuing a conversation group in an organization in order to modify, in order to bridge the gaps, and in order to give a direction or in order to throw a light where the organization is slipping, what are the requirements to avoid that slip into a gulf. An intellectual is a person who engages in critical thinking and reflection about the reality of organization and who proposes solutions for the normative problems and thus gains a space in the organization. I would like to repeat. An intellectual proposes solutions for the normative problems and thus gains a space in an organization. What is the responsibility of intellectuals? Then we may question. An analysis on the intellectual culture. I repeat this sentence. An analysis on the intellectual culture. It is argued that it is largely subservient to power. It is particularly critical of social scientists and technologists who argued were providing a pseudo-scientific justification to the existing system. These two sections are specifically the technocrats and other pseudo-scientific people. They give a justification for the existing system, a status quo, but they never develop. They never critically examine the systems, to what extent the system has to be molded, to in which direction the system, the modification process has to be taken. There, the role of intellectuals will work as a strong foundation for any organization. The main emphasis of my talk is the role of intellectuals to be played. Why should they lead conversation? What has to be done? Only those who are willing to resist criticism themselves with their personal strong moral code, only they have the right to communicate paymaster. This also I will repeat the sentence. Only they have the right to communicate to the paymaster is a person who maintains strong moral code. The intellectual with that strong moral code can communicate to the top brass, starting from CEO down to the level that is analysis and what are the solutions. Management may resist, may agree, may disagree. It is their privilege, administrative privilege, but they have to give a patient hearing. They have to hear the intellectual's affirmation and critical analysis submitted to the organization. The responsibility of intellectuals in any organization is considerable, because constantly moving towards change in ideas, constantly moving towards change in ideas, customs, concepts. This movement lies on the shoulders of intellectuals who transmit the momentum in the engine of action to produce a renewed intellectual conversation whose goal is to develop and raise human value at all levels and in all aspects of life. The intellectuals are not only the elitist class producing the philosophical, social, educational, and economic theories, which only includes the production of ideas. They have a comprehensive vision of a man and society, coupled with a deep knowledge and understanding emanating from the ground towards mobilizing all segments of the organization and motivating them to activate their role in and share their views and opinions in the way they deem it fit. If a financial head wants to evaluate the capacity or the productivity of an intellectual, it is beyond parameters. If management entrusts to a financial head whether to continue this individual with intellectual capability or not, I am sure the financial head is not at all a capable person, not at all a suitable person to evaluate, because his field of specialization is different. The intellectual capacity is different. The intellectual role in an organization should be realized by the CEO himself. What are his ideas? What is basically the normative base of an intellectual? What is his morale and his dedication to the organization in giving a critical analysis about any idea of an organization? The matter now, how little or huge is the size of importance of these categories, specifically intellectuals, and how much they weight in the organization balance of power. But beyond the balance of power, beyond the hierarchy, beyond the normal conversation, this intellectual conversation has to be allowed by the intellectuals in the best interest of the larger interest of the organization. It is common knowledge that intellectuals have the essential knowledge in the various contemporary or widespread intellectual matters, as well as in an undeniable knowledge of various aspects of social, political, economic, and educational life. And while all of this primordial, it is crucial for the reality cultured to employ this knowledge in the sole purpose of gaining the ability to monitor the developing rate of their organizations. They should also hold the capacity to observe the social and intellectual problems, as well as the signs of a change experienced by each segment at a certain time of a certain era when global change prevails on every levels of life, including normative aspects of life and include the impact on human values. This being said, that everyone who has a bit of knowledge in a particular field has the power of influence his environment or play the role of the educated educator, which is illustrated by the observation, characterization, and analysis, then solutions. The power of influence seen from the actual belief of the cultured person in the necessity of harnessing his knowledge, his ideas, and his insightful vision for the sake of organization. Thus, the mere possession of a particular culture remains merely a personal property whose influence does not exceed that of the cultured person, and that would pointlessly remain nothing more than just another characteristic among many others of his personality. Here, developing of personalities, developing people to communicate beyond the horizon of the limited sphere which is given by the organization. The more of his culture represents a joint product between the privacy of the individual and the broad intellectual comprehensiveness. As I'm repeating this, broad intellectual comprehensiveness, and the more his feeling of belonging to the organization makes him feel associated with issues, more certain he will see the role of intellectuals grows bigger and sharper. Bigger and sharper. Therefore, it makes one a real intellectual is not only the size of his knowledge, but rather his ability to analyze, to express, and to produce a particular intellectual product. And more importantly, to be able to employ it and to channel it as an interactive product with a vision of a goal. The main purpose here I want to emphasize of an intellectual in an organization is ability to employ his idea through a channel where it as an interactive product with a vision or goal to the elitist group of the organization in order to throw much light on the organization. Here we can clearly say that the cultivated people, whether they are people working to create a logic or seeking to create and carry ideas aimed at regenerative movement, remain a continuous cycle. That is where continuous conversation, that intellectual conversation, it shall be the main characteristics of a growing organization, specifically when the organization is in an expansive mode. Whether the intellectuals are thinkers sacrificing most of their time for studies aimed at evaluating organizational phenomena, and whether the act has a positive impact or not, the movement and the intellectual movement represent a bastion of strength for a long term perpetuation of the cultural role. That is what is the base where every organization which can afford has to maintain a light class of people called intellectuals who can critically think, able with all ability analyze, express and communicate with normative foundation and with all audacity without hesitating directly the top brass, whether the top brass may accept or may not accept, it is their administrative privilege, but an intellectual has to have that ability and confidence to communicate what he felt, what light is required for a change in the organization. This being said, it is a matter of fact that history bears witness to the names that never grace and still had nevertheless greatest impact on the organization. This is where the comprehensive ability of the top brass of an organization and specifically CEO in choosing people allied this group. If it is again I am saying entrusted to a finance man, he will calculate the salary given to an intellectual. A financial man can never give a measurement. In fact, he is an impediment to evaluate the ability of an intellectual in bringing ideas from a cultivated person, a cultured person with normative, firm background of honesty. That cannot be evaluated. If a finance man says, throw him off, the corporation can save 30 lakhs or 40 lakhs or 50 lakhs. I feel that sort of ideas, if they are accepted by the organizational top brass, they'll be doing more disservice to the organization than service to the organization for the few bucks which are being discussed by the financial wing. It is also well known that ancient and contemporary history are rich with examples of intellectuals who have given so many contributions and were men of drive behind major changes in their organizations. It is here when organization takes major changes and drive in the change, the role of intellectual comes. It may be true those sects of change took a lot of time, but the efforts those intellectuals eventually brought expected results. It is not a given that role of intellectuals directly influences the process of creating change or in the process of building organizations or new bases and concepts. Here it is again a wrong thinking prevailed in the top brass, top class. The role may be indirect through a series of conversations, that may take a lot of time and which make a long and arduous path before they are able to show their impact on an organization. It is the organizations with their different components which reject all the new ideas or concepts threatening to change what they have been used to in their daily lives. The rejection of some of the ideas of intellectuals comes at the beginning from fear of inflicting prejudice to customs and traditions and sanctities, or even the fear of changing in general. This fear is a natural reaction in an organization. This has to be controlled, and the top brass has to overcome from this idea. Every change cannot happen through skipping the stages that organizations must pass and test to concept emergent ideas that are often advanced but form in contrast some kind of rift with what it is prevalent. Unless you have a rift with the prevalent, how can you build new? Unless there is a group, unless there is a few elitist people consisting of with all knowledge and experience, how can they critically analyze? Do you think all these project managers from dawn to dusk crying on somebody and complaining against somebody, can they think? Do they have ability? Do they have comprehensive knowledge about the contemporary society where the systems of management are trend going in the various levels of the society? They did not have. How can they give you such an intellectual conversation? How can they continue a continuous conversation of intellectual conversation to an organization? Finally, therefore, the role of intellectual in the preparation for each potential change through foreseeing the future and taking advantage of the lessons from the past is irrevocable and is uncomparable. Once again I say, if top brass thinks by removing an intellectual, by removing a keen observer, by making an indecent exit to a fellow with brains, and humiliating such part of the people who have audacity and that courage to express what they feel, what they reviewed, that is a detrimental, and it will become an impediment to the organization created by either by the finance wing or by any other scientific people or technological people who feel these intellectuals are obstruction for their way of doing things. This is where the top brass should apply the brain and choose the people. Finally, that being said, the role of intellectuals is to possess the intellectual courage to transcend himself and turn from the particular to the general in preparation of a change. I repeat, from particular to the general in preparation for change. A process that can be channeled through many means, such a position of a behavior or intellectual work committed to a cause. The intellectuals do not sit in a distant place without being in direct contact with the issues of the organization, as they are an integral part of it, and from its permanent regenerating movement. So, finally, what I wish to say in my talk is, if you want regenerating movement, either in the field of values or in the field of work culture or driving at the proper human values at the organization, the role of intellectual has to be there. We cannot underestimate. If organization is underestimating and sending the people out with the people who have a fearless outlook in communicating their idea about a particular thing, that is nothing but ill knowledge of the top brass which is dealing the change. I wish that every organization should encourage that intellectual conversation in an organization on various topics for regenerating the values, for bringing a new change. This is very pivotal. Thank you very much.